Now, even a week ago, it seemed unimaginable.
Attempts at negotiation have failed, and with each passing day, tension grows.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is declaring a national emergency.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak to you.
Indian prime ministers have said they are putting, quote, all options on the table.
Gaming. Gaming never changes. It's been 2 years since the stock fell and the prices rose. Since then, I've seen it all. Witnessed things that chilled me to my very core. Rival factions. Mass shortages. Trade warfare. I tell you this story, not because I wish to relive humanity's darkest days, but rather to condemn them to the annals of PC history, to be looked back upon by gamers of a more gentle breed, who naively dream of life in a more interesting time. This, my children, is the great GPU shortage.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Our story begins in late 2020, and the world is swimming along nicely. Minus this, of course.
Growing concern over a growing health crisis.
And this.
Tonight, a nation on edge.
And, this.
Will you shut up, man? Listen,
But apart from those three, nothing else really happened. But who needs a depressing real world when you have the virtual one? Because in the realm of PC hardware, away from all the disease, grass, and woman, hype was building. For one of the industry's big boys, Nvidia was coming out with a massive line of new graphics cards.
New GPU.
Time.
Titled the GeForce 30 series, the cards were touted as being 2 to 3 times faster than the preceding 20 series. Never mind the fact that the company made that claim every single time they released new GPUs.
You've seen this before? 11 times, as a matter of fact.
Because there were more to these cards than just a numbers increase.
You underestimate my power!
Nvidia also promised that their new products were going to improve on the technology that premiered with the 20 series lineup, effectively making them a straight upgrade across the board. First off, ray tracing, a type of technology that allowed this to look like this, was a key part of Nvidia's marketing.
Cool! There's so many fucking sweet visual filters that I can't see shit!
It had originally debuted with the previous gen.
Look what I found. Come on.
But the boys in green promised that the new ray tracing cores responsible for this effect would be a whopping 2 times more powerful, and gave us some very cool looking CGI diagrams that I'm sure meant something to someone.
Impressive.
For everyone else, they were just something fancy to look at during the press release.
Are you sure I'm not boring you?
No. No. This is all very, fascinating.
Next on the list was DLSS, a fancy bit of tech that relied on super smart AI to upscale puny low-res footage.
What the fuck is that?
To beautiful, eye-shattering 4K. This allowed even the cheapest RTX cards to play games at high resolutions, meaning you could treat your eyes to a virtual smorgasbord without having to visit your friendly neighborhood loan shark. Even more exciting was that ray tracing and DLSS were just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. If you dug just a bit deeper, you'd find more stuff you barely understood.
Don't get it.
Sophisticated Ampere architecture, revolutionary AV1 decoding, and new GDDR6X memory. I don't know what that means, but it's got an X at the end of it, so it's gotta be good. But Nvidia weren't gonna have all the fun, because the other major player in the GPU industry, AMD, were also teasing a new lineup of cards.
Look at the size of that thing.
These too were going to have dozens of exciting new features that would only be understood by 1% of consumers.
Yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing.
But instead of ray tracing and DLSS, AMD offered totally unique, completely original features, such as Fidelity FX, which took DLSS and did the exact same thing.
I'm gonna need the answers for this.
GPU.
So, let's fast forward to September 2020.
Skip.
Chips are soldered,
Oh look, here I go again.
silicon has been electrified, and the PC scene is ready for a massive leap forward.
Let's do this thing!
Which will share no similarities to the previous massive leaps forward.
I've never seen it either ever before in this life.
The first cards to release would be the flagship 3080s and 3090s. These were the biggest, brainiest slabs of silicon Nvidia had produced, and were the perfect way to drum up interest for the lower tier cards. And so consumers rocked up at online retailers, hungry for a new GPU. And what did they find? Out of stock everywhere. No stock here.
Last one, Commander. Make it count.
Zero stock here.
Out!
What about there? Nope.
We don't have a prayer!
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening!
It is worth mentioning that this initial shortage wasn't unexpected, because GPUs had suffered this fate in the past.
Got any GPUs?
No! I'm exceedingly poor!
Where the first batch of cards would be immediately snapped up by hordes of sweaty gamers. In fact, Nvidia would even turn the clock back and use previous shortages of copies of Windows 95 and Pentium processors as examples to prove that in the world of tech, this wasn't completely out of the ordinary.
Relax, I'm fine!
But as things moved along and September turned into October, it soon became clear that the shortage wasn't going to naturally resolve itself by the end of the year.
Well, what are you waiting for?
I don't know.
For this shortage to end.
I guess.
Me too, kid.
Nvidia's CEO, Jensen Huang, would come forward and publicly state that his company was struggling to meet demand.
What? But no! I've just started being a
PC gamer.
However, he would also combine this statement with an enigmatic claim that the 3080 and the 3090 have a demand issue, not a supply issue, and blamed the double whammy of the upcoming holiday season and the shiny new features of the 30 series as reasons for the shortage.
See?
To this day, it seems that even the top economists in the world have absolutely no idea what the hell Jensen was on about. He would eventually conclude his interview with an equally nonsensical belief that I just don't think that there's a real problem to solve. It's a phenomenon to observe. It's just a phenomenon.
Do you think you could spare us the bullshit for 1 minute?
And gave a vague end date of next year. So not exactly the best of responses, but Team Red weren't doing much better, mind you. Their own flagship graphics cards, the 6800s and 6900s, all sold out within minutes of being listed. And unlike Nvidia, which concentrated purely on manufacturing GPUs, AMD had a finger in several tech pies. Not only were they a GPU manufacturer, but they also had a CPU business to baby and were responsible for the processors in the upcoming PS5 and Xbox Series X that took up industrial output that could have been used to pump out more cards.
You're gonna need a bigger
Industrial output.
AMD's CEO, Lisa Su, would also reveal that a company were making things up as they went along.
What's step 2?
Honestly, I didn't think I'd make it this far.
In an interview with Anantech, she gave the usual corporate nonsense of how a team was working on fixing supply and demand. But the interviewer was able to wrangle out an expected end date for the shortage, which did well to dash gamer hopes of a GPU-filled 2021. No! While Nvidia gave 3 to 4 months, Lisa predicted AMD's shortage woes would continue throughout, let's say, the first half of next year. Hold on, I'm supposed to wait a whole 6 to 8 months to get my hands on a GPU? That's not fair. I want 2,000 frames in CSGO now! As expected, gamers were mad, and online forums everywhere were flooded with anger and frustration. Reddit, in particular, was a breeding ground for salt and memes in equal measure. There would have been a riot, but due to both lockdowns and a natural aversion to touching grass, oh shit man, I'm not so sure about this, gamers stayed inside. But that didn't necessarily mean the internet was out of bounds, and it seemed that every tech channel, hoping to make a name for themselves, was harping on and on about the GPU shortage.
It's been very vacant for the amount of GPUs that have been out.
Maybe you haven't tried yet, but you've heard it's hard.
You cannot purchase a single GPU.
Okay guys, I think
probably wouldn't be able to find one of these in stores if we wanted to, and we
get a situation now where you can't actually buy a graphics card. You can buy a graphics card from 2 years ago, even if you wanted one from 2 years.
Whatever. As the year drew to a close, there was still no sign of the shortage slowing down.
Really fast! It's like a freaking hyper out!
Like their big brothers, the lower tier Nvidia cards, the 3070 and the 3060 Ti, would be immediately snapped up upon release. To make things worse, due to the shortage, retailers were hiking prices way above MSRP to capitalize on demand. A 3080 in December would go for $1,200 US. Planning on buying a 3090 for Christmas? Well, you better hope Santa brings you a dialysis machine, because at $2,000, you're waving goodbye to your kidneys. It was clear to anyone that the industry was facing an unprecedented shortage, one that, contrary to what the corporate bigwigs said, would not magically go away in just a few months.
Whoa! It worked!
But new hardware had been coming out ever since the dawn of PC gaming, and, apart from Nvidia's example of the Pentium processor, shortages weren't exactly a given, so how the hell did we get here? Well, there's not really one main culprit. Instead, there are three. The first lot to blame are gamers. Because of the crafty COVID, people the world over were stuck in lockdown, bored out of their minds,
I'm bored of you.
and desperately looking for a hobby. You could try that. If you happen to be a millionaire. Whoa, you really want to try that? Mate, they're literally called board games. Do you honestly think they're gonna be fun? Ah, much better. Now that is a proper hobby. Congratulations, recruit. You're now a gamer. And wait, are you nuts?
Are you broken?
You can't bloody game on that sorry excuse for silicon.
Fortunately, we are here to fix it.
Damn Linus, I gotta get a new GPU.
And so, demand for computer components spiked under the shadow of the pandemic, as hundreds of millions realized that their Dell Optiplexes weren't quite enough machine for Cyberpunk 2077. It was reported that PC sales had grown by a whopping 26.1% in the fourth quarter of 2020. That's a lot of PCs. That's a lot of PC hardware. That's a lot of demand.
That's a lot of money.
And that's one of the causes for a shortage. But if there was so much demand for graphics cards, why didn't Nvidia and AMD just produce more cards?
Why didn't I think of that?
Well, it's quite simple really. They literally couldn't. Enter the second culprit. Production lines. In order to make a GPU, you need semiconductors, a tiny piece of technology used in everything electronic, from clocks to cars.
A BMW Tesla combination.
To clocks in cars.
Manual, semi-automatic. Oh, these are the weapons.
By 2020, the technology was so cheap and accessible that a whopping 2 companies were able to manufacture GPU-grade semiconductors. Samsung, hailing from South Korea, and Taiwan's very own TSMC. For the past 16 years, the duo had absolutely dominated the market.
Good job! Yes!
And heading into 2020, it seemed they would continue to pump out semiconductors like there was no... Oh goddamn! Unfortunately, due to that pesky pandemic forcing lockdowns upon the world, both companies reported that the production lines were already at or near capacity. Combine this with the increased demand for all things electronic, and you end up in a situation where there was no room for GPU manufacturers to make additional orders. Whatever they asked for at the start of the year was the exact number they were gonna get, even if demand had changed during that time.
I have 7 more orders!
So we've got increased demand due to COVID, and we've got decreased supply also due to COVID.
That's me! I did that!
What's up next?
Bam!
Mercifully, it's not related to COVID at all. This time, it's the United States versus China trade war.
Oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics.
Flashback to 2018, and President Trump has a grand idea.
We're going to have
Trade war, and China will pay.
But little did Trump know, he had inadvertently declared war on gamers. While initially spared the first few waves of tariffs, GPU exports from China were eventually hit with a 7.5% to 25% tariff in January 2021, further increasing their end prices. Both EVGA and ASUS warned consumers of this impending price hike.
Beware the
increase in prices,
with the former predicting a $70 increase, and the latter making a vague post on their socials. Zotac, however, decided to raise the price of its 3090s by a staggering $350. A few years ago, that amount of money would have been enough to actually buy a full-fledged card. But alas, in a world of trade wars and shortages, not anymore. And so our story picks right back up in 2021, with the shortage still in full swing. Remember how back in December a 3090 would cost $2K? Well, here we are in March, and retailers are happily selling them for $3,000.
You bullshit!
The Verge reported how a 3060 Ti with a retail price of $399 was being sold on eBay for triple that amount. And it wasn't just current gen models that were suffering from these inflated prices. Tom's Hardware wrote about 2-year-old used GPUs, such as the 2070 and the 2060 Super, were going for $200 over their MSRP. In June, Asus and MSI decided to get really cheeky and re-released a 7-year-old card in an attempt to capitalize on consumer demand.
Oh, Jesus! Oh, God! Oh!
And we're not talking a 7-year-old GPU meant for gaming. Nope, we're talking the GT730, a card that lacked a fan, was packed with less RAM than most phones, and contained architecture that Nvidia stopped supporting.
What is this, Windows? What is this, Dell?
But on the plus side, you could overclock it, if you happen to be insane.
Get out of there, it's gonna blow!
As with any disaster, there were a host of shady characters eager to make money off tragedy. And when it came to GPUs, a dastardly duo arose, ready to swoop in amidst the chaos, suck up as much money as possible, and vanish into the darkness. The first was scalpers.
RenderForce.com.
What's up guys, it's your boy, Mindless Gaming, back at you again with another banger video today, and today we're going to be buying an Nvidia RTX 3090 from an online store. So just before we get into things, a reminder that I upload tons of funny videos and moments and social experiments, like yesterday when I leaked Commonwealth secrets to the Chinese government. So anyway, once again, before we get into things, I would absolutely like if you would decimate that like button and destroy that sub button. Just a reminder, only 25% of you guys who watch my videos are subscribed, so if we could get the number up even higher, that would be poggers. So without any further ado, let's get into the video, guys. It's gonna be lit, fam. Okay guys, so right now, I have my dad's credit card and a bot I purchased from Discord, and what's gonna happen is that every 2 seconds, that bot I purchased from Discord is gonna scan every major online retailer and check if it's got a GPU in stock. So guys, I'm just gonna let this bot run for a few hours while I go outside and act as a canary in the coal mine of a dying and decadent Western civilization. It's gonna be lit, fam. Whoa, guys, can you believe it? I've sniped a GPU without having to spam F5 for a whole working day. And now, instead of actually using my card, I'm just gonna go onto eBay and sell it for 2 to 3 times the recommended retail price. Okay guys, and just like that, I've beaten the game, made it impossible for anybody else to buy a graphics card, and completely ruined an already stressed market for another year. Okay guys, make sure you join me next time around when we go to Canberra and dab on the tomb of the unknown soldier. It's gonna be lit, fam! Scalpers, a pest in supply and demand from the very dawn of commerce, were in the GPU market with a vengeance. Whenever a retailer reported new stock, an army of scalpers and their faithful bots would madly rush toward the checkout, gobble up tasty GPUs by the trolley load, and sell them back to the desperate masses for triple the price.
First time.
And it's not like you could just get your mum to drive you to the local Centrecom or Best Buy to fight the scalpers on an even playing field either.
You had enough yet? Have you had enough yet?
Because that pesky COVID had restricted many GPU launches to the internet, where all would be at the mercy of an algorithm some Chinese guy made in his spare time. In fact, the scalping had gotten so bad, the greed so heinous, that you had scalpers from other areas denouncing those in the GPU business.
Oh, girls, you're both pretty. Can I go home?
Now, one may ask, what in their actions made scalpers worse than retailers, who were also adding $2 grand markups?
I was a businessman doing business.
Anyone? Next up, miners. This lot were a little different. Unlike scalpers, who never intended to use their shiny new GPU,
You removed it from its original packaging.
no! Miners were out to make money in a different way.
Let me tell you about Bitcoin.
Cryptocurrency, a glorified form of gambling for people who think they're smart, was the way to make money in 2021. If you had Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any other imaginary currency with a fancy sounding name, it seemed that the only way was up. Tulip Mania, the dot-com bubble, 2008, the hell are you on about? Mate, at this point in crypto's life cycle, Bitcoin was going for a cool 80k Aussie. While Ethereum would net you 6,000, all from something you could get without leaving mummy's basement. Unfortunately, in order to mine crypto, you needed a graphics card.
Click down.
Okay, maybe 2.
Click down.
Maybe 9.
Click down.
Actually, maybe 16, just to be sure. In the first quarter of 2021, it was predicted that 25% of all GPU sales went to crypto miners, and rest assured, people were not shy about showing off their strains on their city's power grid.
Ready? Ready.
Smell test. Okay.
Let's all say it together, guys. You miners! You miners! You miners!
As the shortage continued, Nvidia did take steps to try to prevent their cards from being used in mining activities, introducing driver updates specifically designed to kneecap mining performance by 50%. Unfortunately, Nvidia didn't realize that they were picking a fight with people
You are dead meat!
who spent their entire lives working with computers and not getting laid. A dangerous combination that produced some of the finest hackers the world had ever seen, who made breaking down Nvidia's defenses
Holy shit!
their life's work.
I want to apologize.
And before you knew it, mining performance was back up to 70% after around 6 months.
Oh well, we tried.
Now, on one hand, they technically were using GPUs for a purpose, instead of just, selling them on eBay, so you can't really complain.
Subtitle. Zip it.
On the other hand, they happen to be buying cards by the literal dozen, further increasing scarcity.
Hey, what's up guys? It's Scarce here.
So I think your license to complain can be reinstated. Congratulations, enjoy your time on Reddit. As 2022 continued to chug along, the aforementioned dastardly duo was constantly strafing the market. And, combined with the ever-present lack of supply, prices were still sky high. An RTX 3090 continued to hover around the $3,000 mark in December, and Nvidia's entire lineup was suffering from at least a $400 markup, with AMD's own graphical pride and joys not faring any better. Something needed to be done to restore supply, reduce demand, and lower prices. But who would step up to the spot? Well, no one really. The whole thing kinda just ended on its own. Come January 2022, the mining problem, well, let's just say, it wasn't much of a problem anymore.
They lost everything except their virginity.
Oh wow, who could have possibly seen that one coming? The price of both Bitcoin and Ethereum took a huge nosedive as the new year rolled around.
Freeze right there!
To the point where a day's worth of mining on a 3090 would net you a measly $5 profit.
And there's plenty more where that came from.
Which meant that unless you happen to have 29 flagship GPUs lying around, your best bet at earning minimum wage would be a shift at your local Maccas.
I'd like to fill out an application.
March 2022 brought more good news, for Trump-era tariffs on GPUs had finally given up the ghost.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Which prompted ASUS to announce potential 25% price decreases across its lineup. And these reductions in price and demand were also coupled with an increase in supply, since by the time April 2022 rolled around, a year and a half after our story began, mind you,
You're late again.
Nvidia was confidently espousing the end of the GPU shortage, and also announced the impending arrival of more next-gen 40 series cards.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
That made your puny 30 series cards quake in their boots. And Tom's Hardware was actually predicting an oversupply of the market due to supply lines normalizing and panicking miners flooding eBay with used crypto cards.
This is horrible.
These three factors would later join forces to destroy scalper hopes of early retirement the world over. Instead of riding off into the sunset, their kind were now forced to sell cards either at or below MSRP in a desperate hope to recoup some of their expenditure.
Spare any gains? Spare any gains?
Singing rang out today from cathedrals and churches across Sydney as congregations gathered to celebrate.
We are confident that we will emerge on the other side of this stronger than before.
This is a good day for Zimbabwe. This is a new era for our nation.
I've never been more hopeful about our future. I have never been more hopeful about America.
So here we are, at the very tail end of 2022, and it seems that the shortage is well and truly over. While our children may have to learn about this chapter of history, we should thank God that they will never have to experience it. In a tale worthy of the Brothers Grimm, everyone involved learned a valuable lesson. Miners were given a crash course in basic economics. Scalpers were taught a lesson in the nuances of supply and demand. And gamers received the most important life lesson of all, that if you do absolutely nothing, then eventually invisible market forces devised by some Scottish guy will fix everything.
That's a pretty lousy lesson.
Hey, I'm a pretty lousy YouTube channel.